Hi, my name is Elizabeth Umbalu Oke, and I am the president and founder of PivotPath. Today we will have cannabis conversations. I'll be speaking with Michael Mumford, and I'll also be speaking with Michael Harris, better known as Coach. For today's conversation, this is actually really dear to my heart because there's so many misconceptions as it relates to the cannabis debate. Should we legalize it? Should we not legalize it? Are there alternatives to legalization? And so I wanted to hear from both of you as it relates to your stance on the issue or the debate. Coach?
My name is Michael Harris. Everybody calls me Coach. Georgia Hemp Association is a company I started in 2016 before hemp even became legal, but come out the cannabis movement, started in Colorado. And my position is that we have to be informed. We have to be educated. We have to be a part of the process if we're not going to be left out because it is a business and how it relates to our community. That makes sense.
Thank you for sure.
Michael Mumford. I'm someone in long-term recovery myself, so I'm very sensitive to the harms of things like drugs or alcohol, more than I think the average citizen hears about on a normal basis. So I take you could say a more conservative approach. I want to listen to the science, trust the science a bit, and make informed decisions for the good of the public based on science.
Right. Now, remember, first of all, that we went through a phase of what they call reefer madness. Before Rockefeller got into the medical industry, all medicine used to be used to have, it was cannabis-based. And so when you had Rockefeller trying to take on certain industries, he had to get rid of this plant. And so they started something called reefer madness. So we got a whole bunch of disinformation about it. But if it was medical-based in all medicine, then my thing is let's research that and find out why it's so important to our bodies. And then you learn that we have something called the endocannabinoid system. It was actually within our body, which most doctors have no idea what that is. Mm-hmm. And so once we start studying that, we start looking for the knowledge of those individuals who are knowledgeable about that particular subject. And we try to build with them in order to get good information on it.
For the matter, I am against legalization because I think that science has not shown all the potential benefits or harms of marijuana yet. And I want to take legalization slower than I think we're moving right now. Sure. For me, when I think of alternatives to legalization, I'm thinking about, okay, let's explore what a good medical marijuana program looks like. Let's explore what decriminalization, and in fact, most major medical associations in the United States have not gotten behind marijuana as a medicine. So I think what they're calling for is a rigorous testing and approval by the FDA.
Systemically, as it relates to cannabis, Black populations or Black communities oftentimes get the short end of the stick, when it comes to criminalization, when it comes to mental health things that's mentioned as well. Yeah. It's kind of been this entertainment thing, something that's kind of a part of the norm.
Mm-hmm. It is a fact statistically that communities of color are getting arrested more for simple marijuana cases than white populations. For example, I know that 14% of the United States is people of color, but 37% of the people who are arrested for marijuana possession are people of color. So there's something not right there, something we have to study. One of the things I'm researching is whether states that have legalized marijuana have lower disparities, and they don't. But the research I'm reading anyway shows that yes, once marijuana is legalized, overall arrests go down for people of all colors, but there's still this disparity.
But we have to remember too that this is a money thing. So when you talk about that arrest, that's a mass incarceration system. We're not going to get the honest information of why they're making these arrests. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just looking at it as the more we can inform our people, the more we can get them involved with the process, the more we could wind up bringing solutions like you're talking about. In our community, it's hard for us to get that information because we only look at the negative aspect from a lot of perspective. Because again, as soon as I say cannabis or hemp or anything like that, the first thing we think about is we smoking it and some dudes on the corner are, doing that hood thing. You know what I'm saying?
My caution is that I don't want to legalize and have a full-blown marijuana industry until we have a better handle on, is it going to address any disparities like that?
And right now I serve as Georgia State Director for Minorities for Medical Marijuana. But as I'm going across the United States, what I'm learning is proportionally as the business concern of this, we're left out. So, not only do we want to learn about the laws and the rules and the regulations, we want to learn about the business aspect of it too, so we can be a part of that.
That's a really good point. And as I follow, there is a lot of money to be made from businesses, from tax revenues for governments. But where there's a lot of money to be made, the corporations are going to swoop in and they're going to take. So we call it big tobacco, big alcohol, big marijuana. So I want to caution, if we're doing this for economic prosperity reasons, we got to remember who's ultimately going to reap all those financial benefits.
The black and white, the gray areas. We mentioned some of the misinformation going out too, in terms of the inaccurate information going out, or just the misinformed pieces of the debate as well. So as agencies like PivotPath, of course, we partner with government agencies and trying to be their voices, if you will, but also be the intermediary between having a two-way conversation between communities, between residents, and the government entities themselves. I'm not sure if you all may have the answer to this question, but as this kind of intermediary, as an agency, what can we be doing, both independent of our client projects, just like this project here, but then also, as a client, partnership alliance with government agencies and being their voice too. What can we better do in terms of our responsibility in ensuring these conversations happen, especially in Black communities?
For some reasons, the environment that the United States has gotten so divisive. What I see here is that let's talk about it with mutual respect.
As we start teaming up with these organizations, we're going back and forth, disseminating information so we can more examine what we're talking about, because we have to be mindful of what they're doing in the background to keep us out of this industry. And I think you make a great point about saying not going too fast, because again, unless we take our time to see how this whole game plan is going, we're going to be left out. And again, we've been left out of the cigarette industry, the automobile industry. There's not been an industry that we can take part at the grassroots level, and this industry is coming in. So again, I look at it as a financial game for our community, but yet I want to be, like Mike is saying, I want to be cautious about the education or the information we get so we can make just decisions, if that makes sense.
But Elizabeth, you're asking a great question. So what inspired you to do this kind of conversation?
Sure. So one of our client partners, we're just going through some of their statistics that they have for their campaign. They launched a new campaign earlier this year. And we saw disparities were actually getting worse as it relates to Black communities, more so with substance use disorder, mental health, suicide rates, depression rates, but it seemed to be skewed in terms of Black communities, specifically Black males, and now Black females too, in terms of just the suicide rates and depression rates also increasing. And so I was just doing research trying to understand, okay, why is this happening? And these were disparities as of 2021. And so it was really just trying to understand where this is coming from, where it's starting. But then the more I began researching, the more I did not see updated information or just conversations, right? I would go on YouTube to have, to look for information just to see if people were having conversations. I didn't really see much, or it was one-sided, it was black and white. But then as it relates to the decision makers and that trickling down, where is the connection? Because there's typically going to be a ceiling somewhere. But then also too, the trickle down approach in terms of legislation sometimes may not make it to those, barbershop conversations or those everyday conversations in the community. And so how do we kind of bridge that gap as well?
I think our legislators are well-intentioned in wanting to get grassroots input, but the way it spells out, I think, is they want to have a ballot measure where it's either yes or no. And to me, then we're missing all that nuance in the middle that I think is so important to the discussion you and I are having. I think while you made the point in a previous conversation that very few, if no one, overdoses from marijuana, I think there's some other harms that we need to bring to the community. I got 5, and I'll just rattle them off, and I won't go and do a deep dive. But youth are under brain development, and when they use any substance, it's going to interrupt the development of their brains. Secondly, what science is showing us is that it used to be that 10% of people who use marijuana developed a cannabis use disorder. But because of the higher THC levels these days, that number's 30% right now. The other 3 are roadway impairment. People think they're driving okay, but they probably have some impairment from driving. Fourthly is workplace impairment and workplace safety. And the last one is the potential danger for pregnant women for their babies or their toddlers if they're breastfeeding.
Do you believe there should be limitations? Because oftentimes, like say you are taking Adderall or there's a prescription, there's still directions in terms of how much you should take of a certain thing. Do you think that that would also or should also apply as it relates to cannabis?
Yes, it should. But you got to remember, at this particular time, there is no dosage system as far as cannabis in the United States, period. So if I can tell you to go home and smoke 3 blunts a day, you don't do this, you know what I'm saying? That doesn't exist. So they talk about microdose, you know what I'm saying? You're going to microdose until you feel the effect of whatever it is. So I do think we're going to get there sooner or later because, again, this is a drug that I think the industry is going to grow. It's an economic base right now. This is the 5th growing commodity it is in the United States right now, moving to get to number 1 as I'm looking at it. So again, as the economic base, being in Georgia, understanding this plant, not only do I want to know about the uses of it, but again, I want to know about the economic empowerment of it too. If that makes sense.
So along the lines also about communication and just this dialogue that we're having, how can we better ensure that these type of conversations that you mentioned going into the community, how can we ensure that we have more of these kind of conversations in Black communities as it relates to healthy, nonviolent dialogue about the Black, white, and gray areas of legalization?
You really want to take everybody's input and make sure that we have a good coalition going forward. So when you got somebody being objective like Mike is, then what is happening is he's creating those conversations that create policy that helps us move forward with what it is.
What we're doing right now, right this minute, is kind of unique, and we just don't. To me, we don't see enough of that.
We don't.
Of much information coming in from many different sides, and it sits safely in the middle where people can take this into consideration and this into consideration and form really whole opinions. So I just value this kind of conversation.
Yes, we value this conversation.
How can we encourage more of this dialogue?
And just for clarification, when I mention diversion programs, what I'm talking about is, if someone is arrested for marijuana possession, it's not like we either need to put them in jail or let them go. Of course, I don't want to put them in jail unfairly, but I don't want to just let them go because I want to have people get some 4 hours of marijuana education, provide them an assessment for cannabis use disorder just to see if they have one, and if they do, give them a voluntary referral to treatment. And I don't think that's happening right now. I don't have it all thought through, but if we legalize marijuana in any way, my deepest concern is that we're going to increase access to marijuana to teenagers who don't understand what they're using or when to stop, or what the potential harms could be. The science is showing that 30% of people who use cannabis today develop a cannabis use disorder. It used to be 10% just 20, 30 years ago. But with the THC levels rising, when I was 30, 40 years ago, when I smoked marijuana, it was like 3% THC. So THC levels are going high. It's so normalized that people are smoking more, so more people are developing these cannabis use disorders. So the answer is definitively yes, it is addictive.
That's why it's important to make sure we know where we get our source of cannabis from. So that's why we have to have a system in place that at least we know where we're getting it. If you're calling the medicine, you know who you're getting it from.
The data is showing us that more teenagers in Georgia go to treatment for marijuana than all other drugs combined. Virtually everyone who's had harder drugs started with marijuana.
We're just coming out of a new age, man, where all this information is coming from Israel. We got doctors having the conversations now, you know what I'm saying? So they're putting a lot of light on the educational aspect of what's going on. So I'm hoping that, you know what I'm saying, like your thought, my thought that we have about this issue, that we can actually have doctors have those same conversation that address the issues that are concerned so we can actually embrace the plant and move forward.
So in our conversation about cannabis, this was actually very insightful because I think that oftentimes people see it as a black and white issue where you have to either be pro-legalization or completely against legalization. And our conversation was about it being more in the gray. What I did also notice was the commonality as it related to the race and to the mission, right? Coach Harris definitely wants to go headstrong as it relates to legalization. And while Michael may not be pro-legalization per se, the alternatives in which he did provide a level of gray area as relates to slowing the race, whether it comes to rehabilitation programs or ways to really think about it from the criminalization standpoint was very insightful. The true essence of this conversation was bridging the gap, bridging the divide as it relates to what seems to be polarized, but really just a gray conversation as it relates to how we can better empower and educate Black communities. Thank you for joining our conversation.